In the Torah portion of Vaetchanan, we begin with Moses praying to God fervently that he should enter the land of Israel. According to one view, he prayed 515 times, until God said to him, "Enough! Don't pray any more." As we read in chapter 3, verse 26, "But God became angry with me because of you, and he did not listen to me." Now, what exactly was Moses praying for? At the literal level, he was praying because he wanted to enter the land of Israel. But the Kabbalists, Rabbi Isaac Luria, explains something quite different. The word "he became angry at me" in Hebrew, vayis'aber bi, can also mean he impregnated me, from the word ibur, meaning pregnancy. What does that mean? Moses was praying that he didn't want his soul to be reincarnated. Another term for reincarnation is ibur, impregnation. He didn't want his soul to have to come back into this world again and again and again, multiple times, to achieve its tikkun, its spiritual healing. That's what he was praying to God for. And God replied, "No. God became angry with me because of you, because of the sins of the Jewish people." It was decreed that Moses would have to come back, said Rabbi Isaac Luria, every 50 years. Until the Messiah would come, his soul would have to be re-impregnated back into this world. Chapter 4, verse 23. "Be careful not to forget the covenant of God, your God, which he made with you." Now, what is this idea of forgetting God? Why would anyone forget God? Obviously, because of the ego. Now, an interesting question is, whose ego is harder to quash? That big, super talented guy who is a great speaker and he's very charismatic and he's very intelligent, or Mr. Ordinary, simple, gets up, goes to work, comes home, happy person? Whose ego is easier to tame? So you might think Mr. Ordinary is has a much easier task because he has nothing so great to be proud of, and therefore it's unlikely to have such a great ego. But actually the matter is not so simple. You see, because with the greater talent comes greater insight. That super talented guy is more capable of realizing the ultimate truth about our existence. Namely, that it's not about you. There's a higher power there, and we're here to serve him. We're here to act as agents of his will. The greater the talent, the greater the ability to realize that fact. And the more talented person could also come more easily to the realization that this is a world of win-win. You don't have to quash your fellow and squash him with your thumb in order to succeed. There's room for all of us. There's abundance in this world. So the greater talents you have, the more capable you are at quashing your ego. So really, it's a fair game for all of us. God gives us egos, but he also gives us the tools with which to quash them. Chapter 5, verse 16. This is in the middle of the Ten Commandments. Honor your father and mother. Pretty straightforward. But Kabbalistically, it's not so straightforward. Do you know why? Because your soul comes from a certain tree. It's like a chip off a certain block of a big soul. And that's not necessarily the same block as your parents' souls. Souls don't have to be related, even though in this world we're relatives of each other with our parents. But when it comes to the soul, your soul could be from a completely different root in that great tree of souls up there from your parents. So you might have actually nothing to do with your parents. So if that's the case, obvious question, why do you have to honor them? If you're really unrelated to them spiritually, so why do you have to honor them? So Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi explained, based on the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, that even though your actual soul might not be related to your parents, it comes in a packaging, spiritual packaging. Your soul has what's called a levush, a garment, which is the point of interaction between the soul and the body. You can't access your soul directly. It has to go through this interface called the levush. And the levush does come from your parents. It's directly influenced by your parents. So Kabbalistically, the reason why you have to honor them is not because of your actual soul, but because of your levush. Chapter 6, verse 4. We have the classic statement which Jews utter every day. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel. God is our God, God is one. The idea of one God. Before performing any mitzvah, any ritual, the Kabbalists taught us we should recite the following formula, which is, this is for the sake of coupling the Holy One, blessed be He, with His Shekhinah. What does that mean? I mean, this seems remarkably dualistic. We have on the one hand the Holy One, blessed be He, and we have the Shekhinah, and we're trying to unite them. We're uniting two elements of God. That sounds so bizarre. Well, obviously we're not talking about God Himself. God is one, but in order to create the world and sustain it and communicate with us, He emanates light from Himself. He has emanations, He has expressions, He has manifestations. Obviously, God is one in essence, but when it comes to His manifestations, there are more than one. And in fact, there are many manifestations, and they fall into two categories, which I would simply call the compatible, those compatible with the world, and those incompatible with the world. Some of those emanations are just too lofty, and we can't relate to them. Some of those emanations keep us alive. They keep the world spinning. So you have the compatible, and you have the incompatible, which is basically these two headings of the Holy One, blessed be He. Holy means removed, aloof, the incompatible. And you have Shekhinah, which means literally, Sheikhein means to dwell, the infusing, the indwelling of that spiritual, godly light into the world in a compatible way. And therefore, every time we perform a mitzvah, commandment of the Torah, what we actually do is we couple these two divine energies together, and we heal a rift in the spiritual worlds and bring unity. And that is why the Kabbalists advise us that we should be conscious of what we're doing and recite this formula beforehand. Be aware that I am bringing the incompatible in touch and in harmony with the compatible. I'm uniting the infinite with the finite. Not such a simple thing, doing a mitzvah. It's not just a little ritual. It actually has a very powerful spiritual ramification. Spiritual message for the week. I was always very moved by this Torah portion, where Moses is praying so many times to God, 515 times, that he should enter the land of Israel, and his prayers are finally declined by God. Something to think about. Do you pray repeatedly to God? Or you just say it once and that's it? I think a lot of the time, we just, we say our prayers and we wait for some results. We wait to see what happens. Maybe if we're really desperate, we pray once or twice again. Have you ever prayed 515 times for something? If you really mean your request, never give up. In fact, we're not even sure that Moses gave up when God told him to stop praying, because there's a principle in the Talmud that whatever the owner of the house says to you, you have to do except leave. God was asking Moses to leave his presence, and that you don't have to listen to. So possibly even Moses continued after God told him to stop. So I think the spiritual message for the week is not to satisfy ourselves with just occasional prayer, but repeated, constant prayer to God, commensurate with our desires and wishes, will surely eventually be heard by Him. Another thing we see from Moses, when God refused Moses' request, He told him to go climb up the mountain and look at the land of Israel. Another spiritual exercise we could do this week is to climb a mountain. Not necessarily a physical mountain, but try and take an elevated perspective of your life. Climb the mountain of desire, because most of the time we're so torn up in our desires that we're not able to think straight about our lives. Try and conquer your mountain and climb it so you have a broader perspective of life, see your deficiencies, see your mistakes, and try to correct them. Thank you very much. Join us again next week for Torah in 10.